All right, welcome back for the second part of One Man's Faith today. We just looked at Ephesus, and I'm just doing a little bit of review until we get to the two churches that we haven't touched yet. The second church is the church of Smyrna. He says that he is the beginning and the end, the one who died and came back to life. This is the depiction that Jesus gives of himself to the church in Smyrna. And he says that he's aware of their painful difficulties. Now, in Smyrna, he did not say, but I have this against you. Smyrna was in the right lane. They were following the right path. But they were in persecution too. We got to keep that in mind. He says that you did not yield to fear in the face of the suffering that was to come. As a matter of fact, he said some of you are going to be put in prison. He says to the one who listens to him, here it is. The one who conquers will not be harmed by the second death. He was speaking to them because they were suffering, they were dying. He says, listen, to you who make it to the end, you won't have to worry about the second death. Not only do we have the promise of eating of the tree of life, but we will not be touched by the second death. Now, the second death, what is that? That's the death at the end of the 1,000-year reign. All right, the first death is when we die. All of us are going to die unless Jesus happens to come, in the next 10 to 20 years. Personally, I don't believe that's going to happen yet. But that's our first death, when we die. The second death is for those who die but did not take Jesus as Lord of their life. They're going to experience what's called a second death, in which they will be thrown into the lake of fire. So that's the second death. So for those that conquer and make it to the end, they won't have to worry about that. And that was the letter to Smyrna. And then there was a letter to Pergamum. And to Pergamum, he says that he is let's see. For these are the words of the one whose word pierces the heart of men. Pierces the heart of men. I believe that's it. I believe the other. There's a. Let me get over to my other revelation here, because I've got to be in the right chapter too. To the first and the last. Okay, to the one who has the sharp two-edged sword, say this. Okay, and he says, I know where you dwell, where Satan's throne is, and you hold fast to my name. So he says, listen, hey, I know the difficulty you're going through, and I'm grateful that you hold to my name. But he says, and this is to Pergamum, I have these things against you. There is two things. He says, you hold to the teachings of Balaam, and you hold to the teachings of the Nicolaitans. Balaam was about causing people to stumble and fall. The Nicolaitans was about introducing false gods and immorality into the worship of that church. So he says, I have these two things against you. But then he says this, repent. Repent. Since I've got these against you, don't continue on in them. Repent. Repent. He says, to him who overcomes, I will give of the hidden manna, and I will give the white stone with his name on it. Okay? White stone, what's that about? When you went into a courtroom before a judge in this time, you didn't have a jury. It was only the judge. And the judge, to indicate innocence or not being innocent, convicted, he would put up a white stone for innocence, a black stone for conviction. Okay? So the white stone means you are innocent. And in this case, what God says is that he's going to write your name on that stone. And I believe, I don't think it says, I will give hidden manna. A new name. That's what it is. I will give him a white stone, and a new name will be written on the stone, which no one knows but he who receives it. So I think we've talked in the past, our names are important. But here, God is going to change our names and give us a name that nobody else knows or has. Okay? So it's an indication of our names depicting who we really are. Depicting who we really are. Okay, so that was the letter to Pergamum. And then the letter to Thyatira, it says, he says, I'm the one that has the eyes like a flame of fire and feet like burnished bronze. Burnished bronze, by saying burnished bronze, he's saying that his feet look like molten metal coming right out of a fire. You may have seen, a depiction of molten iron coming out, and being poured, that white, hot glow. Well, that's what his feet were. His feet had that glow about it. And his eyes were flames of fire. His eyes were flames of fire. He goes and says, I know your deeds, and your love and your faith and your service and your perseverance, and that your deeds of late are greater than they were at first. In other words, they didn't start off good and then start to wear out, but they started and then they got stronger and stronger, and that their later deeds were better. But he says, I have this against you. You tolerate the prophetess Jezebel. Not a good thing. Jezebel deals with control. Jezebel, if I can say this, controlled Ahab. Ahab wanted something, she went out and got it done. She was like the hitman for the mafia or something. She beheaded prophets of God. She's the one that had the 450 prophets that came up against, or Elijah came up against. She had control. She had control, and he says, you tolerate her, and she teaches and leads my bond servants astray. But he says, I'm going to give her time to repent, and if she doesn't, she's going to go away. And he says, but if you overcome, he who keeps my deeds until the end, to him I will give authority over nations. Authority over nations. I don't think we truly see the picture of what it's going to be like when Jesus comes back to rule and reign. We have another parable where Jesus gives, I think it's the one of the talents. He gives 10, 5, and 2, 10, 5, and 1. But when they come back and they say, hey, here's 20, then Jesus says, well done, good and faithful servant. I'll give you charge over 10 nations. And the same to the 5. Where do the nations come from? I thought we were all Christians. What's going on here? Matter of fact, is it Ezekiel? Talks about Yeah, I believe it's Ezekiel, talks about the nations that don't come to Jerusalem to celebrate the Feast of Trumpets will not receive rain that year. So there's an indication here of our serving God by ruling over peoples, but they still have some choice. God never takes choice away. He never takes choice away. And so he says here, hey, you remain to the end, and I'll put you over charge of nations. So it's an interesting concept, one that I don't think we'll truly understand until that time comes. Okay, but that was Thyatira, and then he says to the church of Sardis, he says to him that he is the one that has the 7 spirits of God, the 7 stars. Okay, the 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars. What are the 7 spirits of God? I mentioned that before briefly, but that is in Isaiah chapter 17, I think. My pages are sticking. We see the 7, oops, that may be 11. I may have to find that. I'm getting ready to take a break. It must be 11. 11 mentions 7, the Spirit of the Lord, the Spirit of wisdom, the Spirit of understanding, the Spirit of counsel, the Spirit of strength, the Spirit of knowledge, and the Spirit of the fear of the Lord. Okay, those 7 spirits of God, they're listed in chapter 11, verse 2. So I believe that's the 7 spirits that are talked about here in Revelation, that he is the one that has the 7 spirits, and he has the 7 stars. And we know from the 7 stars that the stars are the angels of the churches. Okay, so let's just stop right there for just a minute. Go ahead, catch your breath, get a cup of coffee, and I'll be right back.